Perfect. Okay. Good day, everyone, and welcome to this discussion. My name is Nevzet Celik, and I am the director of Paris Advanced Research Center. Today, we are honored to host Roland Marchal from Center for International Studies at Sciences Po Paris. We will be exploring the situation in Niger and its implication for West Africa. Welcome again, Professor Roland. Could you briefly tell us about what is going on in Niger?
Okay, we are in the days or following a coup, so which means that basically internally the new junta has to sort out a number of very important political issues. First, to determine who are its primary enemies, and then how to co-opt civilians into a new cabinet and as well in different sections of the state apparatus. So internally, that is certainly a very important task, as well as mobilizing the population for supporting the regime, whatever the international criticisms are. Now, externally, especially looking at the regions, as you know, ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, actually were not very positive towards the coup because that's the third in the region. It's getting like an epidemic. So basically, they have to argue and to try to avoid sanctions that could jeopardize the existence of the junta, knowing that sanctions might go up to military intervention, which personally I am very doubtful about, but certainly this is one of the scenarios that is envisioned today by some states, not all states of the region. And of course, you have, besides this regional issue, you have the fact that international partners, which mean specifically France, Italy, the European Union, as well as the United States of America, have very specific stakes in Niger, and may actually, despite some kind of the same rhetoric, actually have quite divergent views on what should be the outcome of a negotiation. Some believing that the President Bazoum, who have been overthrown, should be reinstalled. Others believe that no, there should maybe be some kind of transition, getting to new elections, maybe fair or more fair elections than they used to be a couple of years ago. And to a certain extent, therefore, acknowledging that the junta is going to stay in power for some months or a couple of years.
Thank you very much. Well, we see on the news a lot of things going on West Africa, and especially Niger. And why are the military leaders in Niger receiving support from countries like Burkina Faso and Mali? And how does historical context contribute to this?
Okay, you have the short and the long answers. The short ones is a kind of trade union of military, and the fact that you have one more military regime in the region makes all military regimes more acceptable, because I wouldn't say they are becoming the norm, but they are now numerous enough to say that's a possible development. This is the short answer, and of course there is some ground to share this view. There is a longer answer that goes to something that is hardly discussed in France. It is the understanding of democracy, the way it has been played by Nigerian elites, as well as Malian and Burkinabe elites, and the fact that for a large part of the population, to say it this way, democracy hasn't delivered. Because when we look deeper into what happened, we may find that the elections were rigged, that the public expression was constrained in many ways, that corruptions actually made a number of officers or leading politicians in Niger, as in Mali and Burkina Faso, quite richer, but the population at large did not benefit from the huge increase of aid that was provided because of the so-called war on terror.
Very interesting. And we also see how does Russia growing influence, particularly through the support from groups like we saw a lot of news when they happened, like Wagner, private military coup. Do you think it's really the impact of this group helped coup d'etat happen in Niger? How it's related? They are there?
Now, I believe we have to be extremely careful. There is an international trend, especially in the Western world, to, I would say, get back to the old Cold War atmosphere, by which all local events are interpreted within a context of international rivalry between Russia and Western states. Everybody, all experts of Niger agree that the conditions of the coup, the reasons, the logic of all those actors were motivated by very internal political parameters. So no one is the Trojan horse of Russia or Wagner in Niger. It's not the way it's going to do. And even if you look Burkina Faso, you could certainly be extremely careful in the way you see the influence or the leverage Russia tried to get with the junta after the two military coups. So you have different. You should take the problem from different viewpoints. Of course, Russia, in its propaganda, is going to raise the issue that the alternative solution to governance crisis in Niger, they will provide military trainings, weapons, ammunitions, and even ground fighters that will allow Niger to get into a much safer direction. The point is that President Bazoum and its army, the Nigerian army, as well as international Western support, such as the Italian military, the American intelligence, actually, made a lot of progress over the last 12 months, and we can see that contrary to Burkina Faso, over the last 6 months, there have been a real improvement in security, not much more and very significant than compared to what was the situation in Niger a year ago. So the reason of the coup, though security is mentioned by the junta rhetoric, security actually can't be a real explanation for what is happening. Yet, it may. So that means Niger will be in a very different position compared to Burkina Faso and Mali. In Mali, what we should not forget is there was different strategies. There was, of course, people within the army, such as the Minister of Defense, who were, pushing very hard to get Russian involvement and Wagner involvement into the management of the crisis. But this became an acceptable stance because France and the United Nations, the MINUSMA, the United Nations peace operation in Mali, failed dramatically in providing security for a large part of the population. Malians, even though who would still like France, certainly will stress in any discussion that, despite Barkhane, and so some others will say because of Barkhane, insecurity developed in the country and reached areas in central Mali that had been saved long before even up to the time of Serval. So the question is why the French are claiming victory against terrorist groups at the time insecurity is spreading in areas that used to be safe before the French came in. And so certainly as well, it's an issue in Burkina Faso. In Niger, it won't be the case. So therefore, the justification to get Wagner operative on the ground is certainly will be certainly much more difficult to explain because actually the Niger army, which is a good army, which could be good at least, not on all situations, but is capable army, as well as his foreign supporters, Europeans or Americans, did a good job. I would say compared to what was achieved in Mali. The point today is of course, Russia is claiming an influence that he certainly doesn't have at this moment. He may get it over the next few months, depending the stance of the international community. But it's very different of Mali, where most of the populations, look at Russia as, thinking that, okay, France failed, the United Nations failed, so let us try another one, because our usual partners did not deliver what they promised us, which means security for most of the population. So they thought Russia on Wagner could be accepted in the sense that they are going to achieve much better this goal than France and the UN. At the same time, of course, you have this very difficult discussion and complex discussion about, when the Élysée or the French president mentioned anti-French feeling, I think it's very wrong in many senses. The population in Sahel, they are not opposed to French citizens, and we see that we witness that in Mali as well as in Burkina Faso. French citizens could still be there, work there, have their family there. They are not harassed by people and so on. But there is a very strong bitterness against French policy towards Africa and French policy towards Mali or Burkina Faso and today Niger. Of course, as an analyst, you could always claim that some part of the criticisms are based on facts, others are completely baseless. But certainly, it would be very wrong to analyze these criticisms only as an outcome of a disinformation process led by Russian or by Wagner. It really corresponds to an important debate that took place over the last 10 or 15 years about the implication of France in Africa, why France was always moving its military to solve crisis, why France is always claiming supporting democracy, but actually very opportunistic in the way it's dealing with African or West African regimes and so on and so forth. So it's a complex discussion. And I think one point where France failed dramatically is because our president, our ministers over the last 5 or 6 years just completely missed the reality of this discussion, the sincerity in this discussion, and wanted to believe and tried to make French citizens believe that all those arguments were silly. They are not silly. And all those arguments were baseless. They are not baseless. And all those arguments were actually brought into existence by the Russian propaganda, which is really a huge simplification of what has been happening.
It's what we see, the social media, very anti-Western and anti-French sentiment. As we explained, in fact, it's not against the French citizen, maybe the French politics, and which, they're talking about uranium, about the French colonialism. And what do you think that French government has to do for the moment?
Okay, one thing we have to be aware of is on Niger as well as Mali or Burkina Faso are not the first countries to do that. I think our own countries have been behaving like that in their history. Is there is a tendency, a very strong tendency into in the popular discourse as well as in public opinion, and of course among elites at first, to blame foreigners or some foreigners for all problems we face. When you see the level of corruption in Mali, for instance, you have to blame first Malian officers or Malian ministers, but actually, it became obvious that you should blame France. So France is somewhat involved because France, on one side, has this European discourse, let us fight corruption and so on. On the other side, when France signed a military contract with the then President Ibrahim Keita, and saw how the money was embezzled by Ibrahim Boubacar Keita family, France never raised an issue. They kept quiet, sold their equipment to the Malian army, got their money, and that was okay. So now it's easy, so France was involved somewhat, but France is not the perpetrators, was not the perpetrators. And of course, the public opinion intend to forget that. The same is happening with the Nigerian army, because we have actually under the Niger judicial system, was in the process of getting to courts a number of leading military officers who had embezzled more than 130 million US dollars for military contracts. So you have those discussions, and of course France is always taken as the easy target, the usual suspect. First, because that's allowed to build national unity, and certainly not to raise governance issue either within the army or within a country, and blame elites for what they have been doing or accepting for too long without protesting. So France today, it's in a very difficult situation, and certainly, we need an aggiornamento that should be, in my view, at three different levels. One is, and I am speaking here as an analyst as well as a French citizen, something is very shocking in France is there is never any decent debate on policy towards the African continent. We got would-be experts who would talk on TVs and so on. That's 3 minutes. We got maybe a program at 11 o'clock in the night to discuss something in Mali and so on. But actually the parliament doesn't play its role because there is a kind of assumption shared by most of the political class in France that discussing foreign policy is up to the president. So basically, when you see the level of discussion at the parliament or at the Senate, the fact that often, ministers do not tell the truth or I would say even sometimes lie openly without any reaction of elected people, I think it's something that is not acceptable in a democracy. And this has taken place in France for decades. It's not now, it's not because of Macron. It's a long history that allow our MPs or senators not to address difficult issues. And so that has to be challenged, and that has to change. And the problem, of course, is that if you bring the debate to the public era, there will be not only the MPs, not only the senators, there will be journalists, there will be experts, there will be civil society organization. But certainly that debate will give much more transparency to any kind of French policy towards the continent, because everybody in France as well as in Africa will be able to watch on YouTube or anywhere else, read documents and know exactly how and why the French are moving into this direction or that direction. This is the first point. The second point is there is something in the French DNA, and I think I would say very much related to our colonial past, that is you know, France is important because French military could reach any place in the former colonies, intervene, of course, save people, babies and young women, and restore democracy. And I think this is maybe not completely untrue, but certainly when we see the numbers of French military intervention on the African continent, and we try to assess the outcomes of those interventions, we don't need to talk about Barkhane. So many interventions before failed dramatically. You know, Chad, how many times the French army intervened in Chad or in Central African Republic to restore peace and democracy. Look how those countries are today. Is Central African Republic at peace with itself? No, far from that. Is Central African Republic you know, a decent regime taking care of its population and so on? Doubtful, and so on and so forth. So they should, I would say, connection between France is important because France could actually send project troops on a crisis into an African crisis and freeze the fighting or bring a solution, which is quite more ambitious, is something that should really be stopped. I'm not saying that French troops should not intervene in Africa, but the parameters of the decision have to be discussed and clearly add a decent public debate in place on Barkhane. Then I'm pretty convinced that, you know, many voices from within the army first, from within the elected elites, as well as in the public opinion, there would be many other conditions would have been put on the duration of Barkhane, and certainly France wouldn't have been in the current collapse of his you know, record on the African continent. The third point that is for me extremely important is that France has to acknowledge the fact that it is not and it is no more a leading actor on the African continent. If you see the way, if you see, yeah, you have many other. Turkey is an important actor. China is an important actor. It's not to say that France should give up on whatever. It's just to say that France has to decide if it goes to Africa, if he wants to partner with African countries, what actually it wants to achieve. You know, I will take an example for instance, okay, today, France is very low in the views of most public opinion in Western Africa. And French bashing is really something a bit too automatic to be taken even seriously at one point. But what is West Africa? Africa is made up of 54 countries, that each one of those countries has developed his own political arena, his own political trajectory, his own way of understanding how he should connect with the international community, with the European Union, with China, with Turkey, with USA, with Russia, as well as in France. And what we see, for instance, without discussing whether it's a good or bad policy, we see that France has actually very good relations, and very pacified relations, I would say, with Ethiopia and Kenya, which are not known to be former colonial countries, okay? And those countries are important. France is very much dealing with those countries on economic terms. It's competing with other countries from the West or from Asia. But France is doing relatively well. Certainly, when you see the figures of trade on investment, you understand that it's not based on any kind of colonial precedent. Okay, so what we should try to discuss is why these kind of relations that are possible with Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa are not possible in West Africa. Is it because the habits or the connections between African elites and French elites are different? Is it because the kind of companies, French companies dealing in those countries are not the same? And this is an important aspect. Is it because of we believe that we are prisoner of our past, of our colonial past? It's another discussion that we should have, but we should not. We should acknowledge the fact that what was true in the 1960s didn't make any sense at that time, was really the worst way to develop unequal relations with our former colonies. And today, those relations are absolutely impossible. So if Macron doesn't understand it, so be it. Then we will try to get after sometimes a new president that will be more creative on this, but there is no way we could try to get back to a situation in which France was a key actor within the international community concerning a number of African countries. This is completely, the African agency has become something that can't be denied. And again, there is many ways to look at this. It's not so new. He started, 2 decades ago, certainly. And there are many ways by which France, as many other countries, would adapt to this new situation. It's the question of our elites and our leadership in France that maybe is still too traditionalist, and maybe not to say paternalistic, or sometimes even more, we could use other words, towards Africa.
Thank you so much. I have learned a lot of things, and it was really new and amazing perspective what you open it. And I hope the coup d'etat will finish soon. I'm glad to have you, and thank you for accepting us. Would you add something else? I think I finished my question, and it was really clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day, and hope to see you in Paris.